All right, hi. Today we're going to talk about PowerApps and Flow. My name is Clayton Osborne. I'm the software development team lead at RelLevel. And I've been a software developer professionally for about 22 years, 30 plus if you want to count unprofessionally. Microsoft certified, Nintex certified. I specialize in SharePoint development customizations and do a lot of .NET and iOS mobile development. So that's pretty much me. Today, PowerApps and Flow. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with PowerApps or Flow. These are the new Microsoft modern offerings to replace a lot of the older technologies. So PowerApps, if you think InfoPath or like the SharePoint Forms and all that kind of stuff, PowerApps kind of step in and fill in that gap plus a lot more. So in PowerApps, it has a nice design interface for a point-and-click approach to creating forms as opposed to classic development customizations. There's no code involved. It's cross-platform, so it's going to look good on mobile. It's going to look good on desktop, Android, iOS, all of that. Plus, it's very extendable. So with PowerApps, there's an actual PowerApp mobile app that comes along with the ecosystem as well. It's tied into SharePoint. It's standalone as well. So there's a PowerApp builder that's online and in the cloud. With the mobile app, basically, you have you're getting PowerApps shared with you, and then they would surface in the mobile app so that you could open them up through the app. You can create a home screen icon to the app so that it kind of looks like its own standalone app. But it's coming from that shared cloud experience that's tied to your 365 account. So there's a PowerApps license that goes along with that to your account so that you have access to those. You're allowed to see the PowerApps themselves. There's tons of different connectors on the back end of PowerApps so that you can reach out to external systems, internal systems. These are some of the most popular ones, but there are plenty more behind the scenes. These are just the most common ones. And that includes on-prem situations. So PowerApps, even though it's in the cloud, can connect to your on-prem data systems through a data gateway. So there's like pieces of software that you can install in the SQL box that allows your SQL box to reach out to PowerApps and surface its data that way. So PowerApps has a number of different types of apps. It ties into SharePoint, of course, as I mentioned before. So SharePoint Forms, you can replace the out-of-the-box edit view forms with a Power App instead of using InfoPath, for example. There's also, this would be an alternative to like Nintex Forms, if anyone's familiar with Nintex. There's Canvas apps, which is more of a blank slate type interface where you can create something from scratch and lay out the elements how you want in a mobile or application desktop type scenario. An alternative to that is model-driven apps where you have the data and PowerApps kind of comes in and says this is what your form should look like based on the data. So you can do a lot of things with dashboards and component-focused elements. Then there's portals, which is very new, external-facing websites basically with PowerApps. Haven't had any experience with those, but I'm sure they're great. So, and then there's the AI Builder, another new feature. It's in preview right now. It's a newer Power App platform, capability for teams with that expertise to easily automate processes and predict outcomes. So it's an exciting new field that's growing. You probably see the commercials on TV, Microsoft AI, all that. This is that tie into Power Apps. And then we come to Flow, which is basically it's workflow automation. If you're familiar with Nintex workflow or SharePoint Designer workflows, this is the new modern approach, much more powerful, upcoming interface or workflow engine with many tie-ins to many different services. So we have, push notifications. You can do content management, collect data, talk with social media, post to social media. You can migrate content from one location to another. Again, you have those connectors to external systems, pretty much anything in the cloud. Simple approval workflows, we're all familiar with doing those. And of course, email. And then of course, so much more. Now there are many external connectors for Flow, and there are so many that the preview page on Microsoft's website, pretty much this is just the list of recents, and it just kind of keeps on going, and there's more being added constantly. So PowerApps and Flow, they work together very well. So they kind of, tie in, and you've got, you would use a Flow as your backend powerhouse to a Power App. The Power App is going to be your interface, and then behind the scenes, it's going to hand off, and you have all these hooks and entryways into Flow attached to SharePoint lists, your SQL servers, pretty much anything. All right, so now we're going to go into some case studies of actual Power Apps that we have implemented. One of them being with Ajax Paving. This is a trucker app, basically a way for them to enter time into the system. The problem that was faced was there was a lot of paper and spreadsheet system going on, a lot of delayed entries. The system was complex. There was a lot of errors in time entry being entered in wrong, timesheets being wrong, overlapping timesheets. A lot of issues there that could be cleaned up and consolidated, made more convenient. So the solution we were looking for, we want to centralize that data. We want everything in one spot and not delayed on paper all over the place, spread around. We need to simplify the process so that time entry is easy and fun, made more convenient for the drivers, and to make it a lot more accurate. A lot of these drivers, they're driving very long hours, and when they, stop to make their time entry, after driving for 10 hours, errors are going to be made. We got to simplify the process, make it easy and quick. So the main points of the app is to capture time entry, simplify the time submission. It needs to be able to submit time, and they need to be able to review their time. It also needs to be very powerful, secure, mobile, so that they have it with them all the time and they can enter in time when needed. It needs to be very easy to use, and a very key important was we needed a first fast turnaround. It needed to be in their hands quickly. We took a design first user-centric approach, which is what we usually do. We are an agile workshop, so we typically do a lot of things through Scrum, agile methodologies. We'll capture user stories. We'll have our UX expert come up and kind of come up with a best approach using the interface first approach, so it's easy for the users. A lot of places where you'll come in and you just kind of start coding away, and you'll have a very complicated interface that's not intuitive for the user to use. We like to focus on the interface first, make sure that it looks good, it's going to be intuitive and easy to use, and then start working about the back end. And then of course the user story component comes in. Is anybody familiar with Agile or Scrum, the whole user story process? So yeah, it's always that process of, as a user, I need to be able to, because. And if everything's written that way, it not only is easy to test, it's easy for the developer as well to know exactly what they need to do, and it delivers a solid, testable, tangible, deliverable feature that they can actually use right away. And then you just build on that. So we take that approach and kind of focus on the interface first and go from there. For this app, we needed to focus on usability for the truck drivers who have been, working long hours and just need to get this done. For this app, we have large, conveniently located buttons, just easy point click right on through to enter their time. Quick, intuitive data entry. It helps with accuracy and just reduces, error proofs it. You can't really mess this up. Enter in your time and done. And then, there's some more metadata that we, of course, capture along with that. We'll go through in a second. Also, the drivers, they're driving at night a lot too. And, this application, we needed to implement a night and day mode. The last thing you want after 10 hours of driving and you're parked and you're getting ready to put up for the night is to have this bright screen in your face that you have to sit here and wide-eye enter in all your data entry at the end of the day. So we can change all of the screens from this night bright mode to night and day mode, whichever they prefer. So all of the screens have this shift that just. So the application, of course, starts off at the main screen where they can enter their time, that nice big button. We're going to enter our time. Need to pick basic 2 routes here, material or an asphalt haul, then actually select the job. And then these jobs are coming from an on-prem SQL database in this case. So there's that data gateway I mentioned in play here, where that data gateway is installed and it's pulling data from SQL and publishing it up to Power Apps. So it's available in the app as a managed list for the dropdown. In that case, this job list, and then that goes for selecting the phase as well. That's a managed list. And then when they enter their time, it's going back into SharePoint, and we're storing the data in a SharePoint list. So SharePoint is our data repository for everything in this case. And then plenty of data validation, checking for overlaps, make sure we're not entering in the same amount of time that we just had. We're not double billing for the same time. Prevents multiple timesheets. They can't create a new timesheet until the previous one is submitted. They can also go and look at their entire timesheet, which has been stored in SharePoint, and then go and submit the timesheet back so that now it's basically up for approval. And then there's a second Power App, which is the administration view back in SharePoint, where the administrators and approvers can see total list of all of the timesheets coming in and approve or reject. There's a flow behind that to basically drive, we got workflow behind that driving the approval process. And then at that point, where there's validation, reminders, approvals, rejections, but then importing into the payment system. Originally, we had thought, we would automate that, but that basically they needed at the time was to just be able to export this and then pull it into their internal system manually from an Excel spreadsheet. Totally possible to automate that kind of thing with Power Apps and Flow as well. Interface with web APIs, just same as most other workflow engines as well. So what basically was delivered is an accelerated, more accurate reporting of time roll or time to payroll, elimination of a lot of the common mistakes and errors that happen with time entry, gives them that nice, fully functional, available app in both iOS and Android. So cross-platform there, selecting that day or night mode, reduce need and saving a lot of time manually researching errors and following up with the drivers on was this time really correct? You get after long hours mistakes are made, and then of course entering your time in at the end of the day. Sometimes you forget everything that's going on. How many people here enter their time in daily or even right after the meeting you were just in? It's a good idea to always enter in things immediately, after you've completed. After you're completed with the drive, you don't want to save that for the end of the week and then hand in all these paper receipts of what you had done. Accuracy definitely suffers. But there's a simple, intuitive design resulting in minimal training. When you have a very simple, intuitive app with that user experience first, people just know how to use it. They just know how to use it just by looking at it. You don't need to train them on how that works. If you need a manual to use most mobile apps, then typically you failed. There should be intuitive, and especially when you're talking iOS, there's a certain set of guidelines that Apple has for the human guideline interface recommendations on how buttons should look and how this, and just everyone knows how to use it. Anyone who has an Apple device knows exactly how to use everything because of that common interface. And the same with Android, they have their way of doing it as well. So that brings us to our next case study. Johnny Green. Now this was kind of a similar app in that it's based on people who were out in the field. This one was the plumbing industry specifically, and it was iPad oriented versus phone. So there's a little bit of a larger screen to work with there. The problem is, again, a paper-based system was in order. work orders for invoices were on the trucks, and it was just paper that was going back and forth. The billing lifecycle depended on the, it was very dependent on the physical office. All that paper had to go out the trucks, it had to come back, and everything had to be put together and entered into the system at that point. So again, a lot of room for error. There was a lot of delays. Solution should be mobile. It needs to be connected so that, again, we have that centralized repository of everything. It needs to be powerful, easy to use, and controlled in that sense with validation and just really tracking what's going on. So they had 3 primary forms: the field service work order form, the labor record, and the parts and material record. And then these are all kind of related. Some of these are the labor record, and there's always a labor records, and parts and materials records as a part of a field service work order. The challenges with this, particularly real world, everything doesn't go quite as easily as you would like to, and you have to get over technological hurdles. This is no different. We had multi-dimensional forms to deal with, which, you know, you're talking like a header record with detail records. And, you know, PowerApps can, of course, support that, but just the interface, how we wanted to do that, made it a little bit more difficult and a challenge to get it looking the way that we needed it to. There were browser incompatibilities that we did run into with just a standard PowerApp form. And then PDF creation. They needed to be able to create PDFs for printing the stuff off later. So out of the box, Flow can't create PDFs without a couple of steps that I'll discuss here. So first of all, multi-dimension forms. As I mentioned, we have the main field service work order form, which has a lot of different sections at the bottom for multiple rows of extra detail that we're adding to this form. And then, of course, each one of those had its own screen, and each one of those could have a sub screen as well. And then pulling up each of these, it got very complex, and doing this in the point and click interface was a little better, of course, than manually coding it from scratch, but the format of these was a little out of the box, using, I believe they used a gallery control to do this, but getting headers to line up with the design, it was quite a challenge. But we overcame that, and the form ended up looking great. The browser incompatibilities we ran into, the SharePoint list forms didn't look right in every browser. So we had to create basically 2 apps. So we had the SharePoint interface, and people using the desktop machines would use the original app that was built kind of on top of SharePoint in SharePoint. But then we also spun up a Canvas app, the other alternative PowerApps type of app where you control the GUI yourself completely, and had to kind of redo the interface in the Canvas app so that it would show up on the mobile devices a lot better. So, and they had iPads in the trucks for that. And then displaying those larger forms down on a smaller mobile device. Most of the time they used iPads, but they could bring it up on their phones as well. So we switched over to the Canvas app and fixed all of those browser compatibility issues. So the PDF creation, though, I would say was the biggest challenge. Not having that direct, hey, I want this on the screen to be exported to a PDF functionality available. So we had to jump through a couple of hoops and get creative with this one. So the major hurdles, of course, we could talk to a third-party service. We could sign up for a web API of sorts where you send the data, they send back the PDF. It was expensive, though. It was there was licensing costs per user. We could have purchased a third-party flow action. I mentioned how this stuff is extendable. You know, you can customize and create your own flows. You can create your own flow actions. You can create a lot of connectors. All of that kind of stuff is extendable. The developer community is constantly creating new ones. Companies are offering them for sale, subscription. Again, I believe that third-party flow action they were looking at was like $5,000 a year, which again, they didn't want to, you know, pay that yearly when they could go the custom route and have it created once at a one-time cost, maybe a little more than 5,000, but in the end, you're not paying that reoccurring constantly. But we came up with a way that utilized the Microsoft stack that was already available versus creating a new flow action that didn't exist. which would have been a lot more lower level, a lot more time intensive. We used Flow, SharePoint, and SharePoint's ability to fill in Word documents, kind of like mail merge type situation. With Word documents, you can create a template that has properties in it that you can populate with data from SharePoint. And then we used OneDrive as well. So while Flow didn't offer an actual way of creating a PDF from a document, OneDrive did. There was a method in OneDrive. So there was a flow that you could save the document to OneDrive and convert it from a PDF using that engine. So we started in SharePoint, and that data would then get merged into a Word document, which would end up in a document library in SharePoint, which the flow would then take and convert that document. It would drop it in OneDrive, convert that to a PDF using the OneDrive command, and then the PDF was referenced in OneDrive, and a link to that PDF was then written back to the SharePoint list, so that when they generated the PDF, they would get a link that they could bring up and display the PDF, and then they could print it off. And there were 2 reports. The Word method, of course, with mail merge, doesn't support repeating lists of data. You can't just have it expand and shrink based on the data you have. So we had to go a little lower level on that particular report and start with Flow parsing HTML together. So that got a little bit more complicated. So again, we started in SharePoint and iterated through the SharePoint list items, put together an HTML block in a variable in Flow, and then looped through all the line detail items again, writing and piecing together the HTML in a variable. And then that one variable was saved as a file to OneDrive, and then the OneDrive action could then write that to a PDF, which again, we saved that link back into SharePoint. So there was quite a bit surrounding that whole process, but it was fairly successful and it works well. The next case study we have was a local Grand Rapids jeweler company. They needed a solution to their problem. Basically, they had salespeople who were on the floor selling jewelry, and the people would be entered into their system for follow-ups. Someone bought a piece of jewelry one week, and maybe 3 months down the road they want to follow up and see how they're doing, maybe get some repeat business that way. And but there were no actual schedules like saved. They had their primary CRM system where everything was entered in, but there was nothing automating that, nothing taking that and running on that data. So there are no schedules, there were no reminders, there was no accountability. They didn't know who was handling what clients just at a glance. They couldn't visualize the big picture. They couldn't see all of the data. It was just kind of hidden in the records system. The data was outdated pretty much anytime they looked at it. What they ended up doing was every 2 weeks, they would print off this giant binder, which had all of the records for all of the follow-ups that they want to do. And that was, outdated the second that they printed it, and tons of wasted paper, obviously. And then it was a security concern because someone could, walk off with this binder and have their entire client list. So they had to waste paper because it was outdated immediately, and then they had to destroy it afterwards too. And then of course they had a small budget, so kind of enters in PowerApps, which is a great model for this because it's a quick turnaround type development cycle. There's no code. We're not spinning up IIS. We're not spinning up on-prem resources to host a website or a new application. We're going to use the Microsoft stack that they already have. The old process, as I explained, salesperson on the floor, that new clientele added records, those 2-week printouts, those follow-ups, they wanted them to be conducted in a cadence, an actual schedule, certain months, and then they would just repeat that process over and over. What the solution needs to do, we need to capture and store those tasks centrally. Again, it's pretty much the theme for most of these case studies. We want that data stored. We want to be able to work against that data. We want scheduled follow-ups. So flow in this case. We want that type of repeatable process, scheduled email reminders, or, within an app, which is what we're basically going for here. They want dashboards so that they can see the whole of how is the sales process doing, how are these tasks being managed, are they being answered in a timely fashion, and we want it to be cloud-based. So this was kind of the graph of, they dubbed it the Playbook Application. They wanted Power BI display dashboards. They had on-prem SQL for their in-house app where everything was being tied in currently and everything was being stored. That's where all the clients were right now. But we wanted to bring this up to the cloud in a Power App. So we wanted this front-facing app that the floor people could always look at to know what their actionable items, basically. So we proposed Power Apps. It would basically, we would interface with a SQL Azure database. So again, in the cloud, the Power App would be able to write back and forth. So be able to read the clients, but also commit and finalize the tasks, complete them, do the follow-ups, and then track that in that SQL database. And then of course, surface everything into Power BI so that we can see the metrics of what's been going on. And they landed on a very cheap Azure, pricing scheme of $15 a month, which is great. In fact, Ryan over here at that price felt like giving his entire family SQL Azure databases for Christmas. Sorry, Ryan. So,
you need them everywhere.
And then we're talking about Ryan still. He was a part of this engagement. Mentioned to them, do you want that mobile? And their eyes lit up. Mobile. Now, they're picturing the salespeople carrying around their phones and doing this, on the sales floor, being able to write off these tasks. And, we could talk to, the Power App's going to connect to SQL Azure, have that two-way communication with their device and the app, and then go across the schedule that they had put forth. So, every 2 weeks, 6 months, 11 months, diamond sales or, a different schedule. So everything's being categorized and acted upon accordingly. And then, we wrote up the user stories, of course, as I explained before. We knew that agile methodology. This makes a perfect test plan as well. As a user, I would like to see the current metrics of my follow-ups. And, the interface, this is kind of our mock-up. I wish I had real screenshots of this app, but the mock-up, yes, we checked that box. We've got, that metrics. I want, a user would like to have a button to access my current follow-ups. So again, check. We can go right down this list and, as a user, I'd love to have a button to access all of my history of follow-ups, basically anything I need to go back and make changes to. Again, we're checking that box. The user stories makes this easy, and it's easy for the client as well to kind of run down these and yep, user acceptance testing. Everything works as intended. There were a couple other screens, of course, being able to list all of the tasks and then having the actual data entry where they're writing in and following up with these clients. And then Ryan mentions another thing, gamification. How about that? Let's pit the salespeople against each other. Add a little fun to this. It's fun to enter in tasks when you see that number. You're always collecting those badges. You're always, that kind of thing. We have all this historical data we didn't have before. It's now trackable. It's rewardable, incentivized, if I can say that word. So now the salespeople, they can look at their phone and they can see who's highest ranking, what kind of numbers are we running. And then, it's trackable to management as well. So the main problem, coming back to our problems again, we can revisit. They had no schedules. Now they have real-time schedules. They can see this at a glance. They can see it quick. There were no reminders. Now we're programmatically reminding them when something is due. No accountability. Now we got assigned tasks. We know exactly who's doing what and when. We know where they are in the process, the percentage complete, if they've done it or not. Visualize the big picture. So we got those Power BI dashboards now. outdated data, we don't need any more wasted paper. We don't need to print those binders off. It's right there on the phone. It's right there on the desktop. Because of Power Apps, it's on any device, basically. We can review that data real time. Security, again, no more binders. No one's walking off with that binder. It's in a Microsoft secured environment. Two-factor authentication, it's on your device, it's on your desktop. And we were working with a small budget. And all of this was done in a small 40-hour block. Basically things were getting done so fast. Hey, gamification. Hey, you want that mobile? It just, the environment lends itself very well to this type of work. Quick, rapid development, quick turnaround. I'm a software developer, so I'm digging into the code a lot. But this is this stuff has been coming for a while. It's powerful. It makes creating very powerful applications quickly, very easily. And then of course, if you need to go deeper, you still can. You can create that custom action. You can string together SharePoint, OneDrive, and all that to come up with a powerful solution like we did with the PDF action and kind of get the system to do something it wasn't meant to do originally, but eventually it's coming. That giant list of connectors, for example, is growing constantly. New custom actions are coming and being added to the system constantly. It's an ever growing environment that's not going to shrink. So I kind of ran through that pretty quick. We have plenty of time for QA. Yeah.
So the example that you used of the plumbing business,
Mm-hmm.
they also, could that app be enhanced to where the plumber closes out the job and takes a picture of the devices he installed, the serial numbers of what he installed in terms of product, and then a finished, scan in the sign off from the city to kind of close out that? Could it, is that, you can continue to take it?
Yes, yeah. So the question is, can that be enhanced to do a lot more, to actually going in and documenting all of the work and getting the sign off with the city and everything. And obviously anything is possible with custom development. So those flows can hook into a number of different systems. If there's specific APIs with the city, those can be created or fleshed out. The flow has a lot of interaction with the different systems. If they use a certain ERP system or a CRM, it can typically hook into that. It can hook into Salesforce. It can hook into just a regular API. When you're hooking into regular APIs, then you may get a little bit more deep in the weeds with having to mess with raw XML and JSON, and that developer mind is going to start being needed more. But everything's possible. Like the pictures is a good example. We have another client where we've done a mobile app where they come in and they have problems with furniture, and the technician will come in and they will take a picture of the furniture. The app requires to take a distant and a close-up of the damage and then submit that back to corporate, and then they can come up with a follow-up. Maybe they send somebody out to troubleshoot. They can annotate the pictures, all that kind of stuff.
So you can make that workflow automated so that a technician perspective who's out fixing the chair, they know exactly what, there's no variance.
Yep. It's all in the interface and the back end flow. Everything's going to be state machine kind of oriented. It's going to go from bucket A to B, can go through manager approval. They can take pictures, they can submit that kind of stuff, save the pictures back into SharePoint. Really the sky's the limit.
So for that process where you took it from SharePoint to Word to OneDrive to a PDF,
Mm-hmm.
what's the skill set needed there? Is that something you can teach, or is it you have to hire programmers?
It's something that can be taught. It is all point and click. Pretty much maybe a SharePoint power user level. You probably wouldn't have to go as far as a developer. But you do kind of have to start going into that mindset of, that problem solving, of figuring out logical if then. I'm going to set up all of the tokens in the application that I know are going to be replaced, or especially in the case of the HTML building, that's a little more deep in the weeds, right, of actually writing raw HTML and concatenating it together as one cohesive document. But it depends on the complexity, really. A single page report, you know, you're just talking kind of a mail merge situation. And then Flow has all the steps to take you through that. Yeah.
So I've been starting to work with the Power BI and the data gateway and finally got that set up.
Mhm.
So what I'm starting to see now is like workflow. Like, can you take and I'll have to look into a lot of the apps, take just a process, a workflow process from start to finish in one of the Power Apps. When you take it, and since I have the data gateway, connect it back to my ERP system and basically just pull out like a purchase record system
Okay.
and take it from the approval process.
So the question is to kind of automate some staging of data before it goes to Power BI. Yeah, I mean, with Flow, you can do that totally. You can take and jump data from one system to the other, pull records, manipulate it, you know, basically put it wherever you need it. With the data gateway, you know, you're probably talking an on-prem SQL type situation. So, you know, the data gateways there are data gateways available, you know, with Power Apps and Flow as well. The same situation where you can get that data, manipulate it, and basically put it back to your staging database where Power BI is going to then display it. Anybody else? Do you have any online questions? No online questions.
Clay, there was one more question that was brought up to me about all the apps that you showed that interface with the APIs. Are those included, or is there additional fees?
So yeah, the question is, are there additional fees with some of these connectors? And there are standard connectors, but there are also premium connectors. So the standard connectors typically come with your out-of-the-box Power BI license, but there are premium connectors that cost extra, either, you know, through third party, because third parties have created them and published them, and they want to get paid for their work. And as well, Microsoft offers premium connectors that are above and beyond, which increase your subscription cost basically to have access to them. So there's that elevated license for each user. So certain users could have permissions to have access to them while others don't.
I think in ePHI has the Power BI Pro.
So the Power ePHI, yes, yeah. So yeah,
Power BI Pro, I think was 10 a month.
10.
Yeah.
So Power BI Pro is $10 a month. Yeah. Yeah. I'm not familiar with all of the pricing, but
Just because I just got it.
yeah, you just. Yep.
Do you have any advice for making a decision between, you know, whether you should, you know, build something out into so if you have, you know, the case study, you know what the problem is, and you know then there's a solution. Do you have any suggestions for, you know, should I, like, I look at some of the examples you gave and I can think of stuff that's already developed, you know, you turn that kind of stuff up to 11, and you know, how, do you have any suggestions for, you know, do I go just pay, you know, this, they're already doing it and I can just get this application, or I can, you know, just design it myself? You know, where's like the level where you would say, hey, you know, kind of crossover and mind blow? Because I look at the time tracking and all that, and you know, that all looks really intriguing, but you know, we have a solution where it does all that for you and it's truck. So
Yeah.
it's appealing to be able to use that, but you know, how, I guess, what kind of, is there advice on when you should go that route or when you should build it yourself?
Okay. So the question is basically when to use third party versus building it yourself. You know, where's that trade-off? I mean, really, it's cost. I mean, how many man hours is it going to take you to home grow this versus, you know, what does this third party want? If they want a subscription based access to it, is it a one-time cost? They build it for you. I mean, we do a lot of that where we build, you know, we engage in a project and we have that upfront estimate, that upfront cost, and we build it, and there you've got it. There are a lot of places that do subscription based, you know, you're buying off the shelf. Of course, off the shelf then isn't as customizable. You're not, you know, you're working around the system. Kind of with custom development, I always kind of picture an image of a puzzle piece. You know, that's what the client needs, is this puzzle piece, and off the shelf software is like a square that's trying to hit that. And it meets some of the needs, fills some of the arms, but not all of them. Custom development, you can get exactly what you want. Some places give you more than what you need, You know, you've got this monolithic circle that engulfs the puzzle piece and you're paying extra for more that you don't need. But really it comes down to cost. You know, how much time do you have available? Do you need to contract it out to somebody to build, or do you have the in-house man hours to build it? I guess it's not really answering your question since I'm just giving you more questions, but there's a lot that goes into it really. And it does all kind of boil down to time and money. When to go custom, when to purchase, and how, I guess you consider how long are you going to use it? You know, if you're only going to use it for 2 years and you're going to jump to the next, you know, best thing that you know is coming, you know, do you want to pay all this upfront money to have it created and then dump it, or, you know, just 2 years of subscription is going to be cheaper to get you by? You know, all of this needs to be considered.
Yeah, no. Like for the Johnny Green application to do the PDF, you could use the Flow app, but you had to pay for every run it does. So they did 5,000 jobs a year, so that's like a price every time they had to print PDF.
Yeah, if you want.
That pricing model was no good for them.
Yeah, that was one of the third-party options, you know, and that's often, I think Nintex document generation is that way. It's a per clip, per generated document, you know, it comes through and they generate it and give it back to you, but they charge you each hit, or you're allowed 1,000 a month. And once you exceed that, you start, you know, it's like your cellular plan, you're off minutes, you're now going into getting charged per minute. Anybody else? All right.